Hey, welcome. I'm Marci Mallory with the Pennsylvania Parks and Forests Foundation, and we have Dr. Allen Dieterich-Ward, professor at Shippensburg University and author of Cradle of Conservation. Allen, thank you for being here.
Marci, it's my pleasure as always. And
So
I'm doing a little product placement here for Think Outdoors.
yes, thank you. A little plug for the
fabulous
podcast.
new podcast from the Pennsylvania Parks and Forests Foundation.
Thank you. So we're excited today. We're going to be diving into the Cradle of Conservation. This is, I think, our sixth conversation, and every month we take it from a different perspective. And Cradle of Conservation, the book, is an outgrowth of the Conservation Heritage Project, and I will put that into the chat there later if you're not familiar with the project. But as with all of these other conversations, we encourage you to, if you have a question, to put it in the chat box. I'll monitor that, and then at the appropriate time, I will make sure that Allen sees the question. So Today we're diving into water, no pun intended.
Yeah.
See what I did there?
Public policy in water, huh?
Yes, important conversation. I know parts of the state got some serious rain the past couple of days. We've had some flash flooding issues. There was recently a report in the Susquehanna talking about pollution. So I think the conversation is very timely to talk about water and water policy. So Allen, thank you again for joining me. Would you like me to bring up your presentation?
Please do. Yeah, Marci, as always, I'm excited to be here. I'm not on the Facebook, so I've been leaving it up to you to tell me, but it sounds like folks have been tuning in either during the time slot or checking things out after, which is awesome. As always, as Marci mentioned, this is a conversation, and it's coming out of our longer term efforts as part of the Pennsylvania Conservation and Heritage Project. We have an amazing website that has all kinds of materials that are publicly available. They're available for everyone. Documentaries. I'm gonna if you're having your bingo card here, I will mention one of the documentaries a little later on, and Marci will put info about it in the chat. And as always, we were really excited to engage with and bring in new folks into the Conservation Heritage Project. So if you'd like to get involved, click on paconservationheritage.org and then click on the Get Involved link.
Great pitch. Thank you.
Yeah. So as Marci mentioned, these ideas are coming out of my book, Cradle of Conservation: Environmental History of Pennsylvania. An outgrowth of the Pennsylvania Conservation Heritage Project that we developed in partnership with the Pennsylvania Historical Association. If you're interested in this book, you can get copies of it from paconservationheritage.org or go directly to the Parks and Forests Foundation website, and all proceeds benefit public lands in Pennsylvania through the Parks and Forests Foundation. So as Marci mentioned, our theme this month is public policy. But since public policy is so broad, we decided we'd hone in on a topic that we haven't talked a whole lot about so far, and that is water. One of the central sort of unifying factors of Cradle of Conservation is the notion of working landscapes. And of course, our wet landscapes are as worked as any of our dry landscapes. And so what I'm going to do is kind of take us through three different eras of Pennsylvania history, what we sort of sum up as the conservation era, as the environmentalist era, and then as the environmental justice era. We're going to focus on some ideas related to water. I'll pause during each of those times so Marci and I can have a chat. She always has awesome and interesting ideas, sort of drawing from her experiences in the trenches, or I guess in the riffles of public policy for with the Parks and Forests Foundation. And I thought we'd sort of think in two broad sets of terms in public policy with water. One of them having to do with aquatic life and fish particularly, but then the other having to do with human consumption, so drinking water, right? And those are two really timely topics for us. As much as we talk about forests, kind of state forests as being kind of the centerpiece of Pennsylvania conservation history, the reality is the first conservation laws on the state level were not about forests at all. They were about fish. And there was this increasing concern in the middle 19th century about the declining stocks of Pennsylvania fish, and particularly the American shad. This was a fish that was really famous as providing life-giving sustenance. If you look back at native peoples, the arrival of the shad, who are migratory up the rivers, there are these fish that live part of their lives in the sea, but then come back to their kind of native spawning grounds. These fish, like the shad, were sort of really looked forward to during those times of hunger in the spring. And sort of Pennsylvania colonists, settlers from Europe, sort of had the same thing. But by the mid-19th century, a combination of different factors, to some extent pollution, to some extent overfishing, but even more importantly, the building of dams for water power, had virtually eliminated the American shad from Pennsylvania waters, because these fish, they could not reproduce. They could not get to their native spawning grounds. So in 1866, the Pennsylvania General Assembly established a commissioner of fisheries to study this issue. The first commissioner of fisheries was a Colonel James Worrell. And he made a number of recommendations to the legislature in terms of outlawing particular kinds of fishings, of sort of mass fishing, and requiring fishways and sluices on dams to allow fish to get upriver. Now, some of these early laws were not particularly effective, but if you can think about the fact that, again, decades before we had forest conservation laws or wildlife conservation laws on the state level, the notion that we were having these restrictions on Pennsylvania's private use of the land is, I think, remarkable. And by 1873, that initial commissioner of fisheries had been expanded to what is going to later on become the Pennsylvania, what's now the Fish and Boat Commission, to three commissioners. And even by 1873, this notion that there needed to be a systematic restoration of the American shad had become public policy in Pennsylvania, right? Okay, so on the one hand, then we have this early conversation about fish, about waterways, about aquatic habitat, right? But of course, that is going hand in hand in concerns about drinking water. Now, there's a whole history of sort of early public works projects for establishing a clean drinking water in Philadelphia and other Pennsylvania cities in Cradle of Conservation. But I wanted to actually kind of start with, to give us some place to start for this conversation, again, at the statewide level. And the first state law focused on clean drinking water is the Purity of Waters Act in 1905. And this Purity of Waters Act goes hand in hand with the creation of the State Board of Health. And it is finally, there's this just pushback and pushback and pushback that actually a great book called The Health of the Commonwealth by my friend James Higgins kind of tells this whole story. If you look it up, it's a Temple University Press publishes The Health of the Commonwealth. And it is a typhoid outbreak in Butler that is kind of finally the last straw that state officials say we have to do something. And so this Purity of Waters Act is established. At the same time, you see eminent domain laws being extended so that communities can create their own municipal, dams and kind of can create areas for clean water. You could see here, this rose to such a prominent level that Clara Barton, right? The Clara Barton, Civil War founder of the American Red Cross, kind of visits Butler in the aftermath of this typhoid epidemic. And it becomes sort of this kind of national scandal that Pennsylvania is struggling with. And this sort of prompts the development of this Clean Water, this Purity of Waters Act and the Board of Health. So that's step one, Marci. Did you know Clara Barton was involved in the Purity of Waters Act?
I did not know. Growing up, I read lots of books about her. She was one of my heroines.
Yep, she was in her 80s by the time. So this was kind of later on in her life. But this connection of the need for clean drinking water, for public health, and the notion that it can no longer be left to kind of private industry or to local communities, that there needed to be this state level public policy. This is really where we're seeing that emerge.
Nice.
Yeah. So, okay, so that's the conservation era. As we get into the 20th century, right, it becomes increasingly clear over time that the initial clean water laws and the initial establishment of fisheries, in the face of more and more municipal development, more and more industrial development, that is just not going to accomplish those goals, right? And so we see, for example, the power of the mining industry in Pennsylvania is such that all of these early laws, from the Purity of Waters Law in 1905 through the Clean Streams Law, it evolves into a Clean Streams Law in 1937. There are then adjustments or updates to that Clean Streams Law in 1965. But every single one of them, Marci, exempts industry, and particularly exempts mining from these water quality laws, right? Both in terms of fish habitat, but then also in terms of clean drinking water. And this becomes increasingly a political issue, right? That comes to define the origins of the environmental movement in Pennsylvania. And I have here kind of a real famous picture of Franklin Curry, a representative from Sunbury, later on a senator from Sunbury, who is one of the real architects of Pennsylvania's environmental revolution. He is the author of the Environmental Rights Amendment, and he runs on a platform when he's first elected in the mid-1960s, because his local representative, a Republican machine politician, he voted to allow this exemption for mines from the Clean Streams Law update in 1965. And Curry sort of runs on a platform of clean streams and clean politics, right? And this resonates powerfully, even in this kind of conservative area of Sunbury, at a moment in time when sort of the water pollution becomes this really, really important political element. And listen to the language. So Curry gets elected. There's this environmental sort of revolution. A lot of other things happen, including the Environmental Rights Amendment. And in 1970, the Clean Streams Law is updated, and a lot of those exemptions for industry are taken out. And listen to the language. And this is really Curry's language and his contemporaries, right? This is from the Clean Streams Law update in 1970. Clean, unpolluted streams are absolutely essential if Pennsylvania is to attract new manufacturing industries and to develop Pennsylvania's full share of the tourist industry, right? Clean, unpolluted water is absolutely essential if Pennsylvanians are to have adequate outdoor recreational facilities. It is the objective of the Clean Streams Law not only to prevent further pollution of the waters of the Commonwealth, but also to reclaim and restore a clean, unpolluted condition in every stream in Pennsylvania that is presently polluted, right? Like that is a stunning sort of a vision for Pennsylvania's streams when you consider that, I'd say virtually every stream in Pennsylvania in 1970 had at least some level of water pollution, some of which, of course, were bright orange from acid mine runoff, right? So when we talk about this kind of being an environmental revolution, that language would still be seen as revolutionary language today, I think, right? Equating clean streams with a growing economy and setting the goal to make every stream to be clear and unpolluted. Yeah. So
a lofty goal. We have a lot of miles of rivers and streams.
We sure do, right? And this is 50 years ago now. Right? Okay. Now, and we'll come back and talk about that a little bit more. I think Franklin Curry's book is also linked from the Conservation Heritage Project's website.
It is, and it's also available on our website.
Yeah, it's a great book. Franklin Curry is kind of this, a towering figure in Pennsylvania environmental history, and it's a fascinating read. Okay, but I know time's limited, so on to the next one. Okay, so just as we see this shift within public policy toward clean drinking water, we also see a shift in the environmentalist era in public policies toward aquatic habitat, right? And one of my heroes of Pennsylvania environmental history, Ralph Abel, who was this guy from Pittsburgh, right? Really was a Boy Scout leader, becomes well known as a conservationist, sort of goes to Harrisburg, becomes a real public policy guru around environmental legislation. And in 1972, he's appointed the executive director of what's then the Pennsylvania Fish Commission. And the reality is kind of by that time, again, the Fish Commission was set up with lofty goals, but if you're going to exempt industry, right, from the ability to regulate water quality, and you're going to get your funding from fishing licenses, then by this point, they had really largely focused their efforts on stocking rivers, right? And of course, when you're stocking and not able to really improve the quality of streams, that becomes this exercise in just keeping your fish alive long enough so you can restock them, right? Abel brings this vision to the Fish Commission. And his vision is one that if the water's not clear and not clean enough for fish, then it sure as heck isn't clean enough for human beings either, right? And so he adopts this resource-first strategy. As important as it is to serve the needs of anglers and of humans, it is really the focus of the Fish Commission on the fish, on that aquatic habitat, right? Resource first. And in the mid-1970s, it's not just fish, but the legislature assigns amphibians and reptiles to the Fish Commission as being their responsibility too. And Abel it kind of leads the what becomes the Fish and Boat Commission in this new direction of really ecology, not just looking at the fish as sort of something that, as individual entities, but as part of this broader habitat that itself deserves, understanding and deserves conservation and preservation. And if you're interested in Ralph Abel, as you know, Marci, and maybe you'll stick this link in the chat, we have this wonderful documentary on Ralph Abel that we produced in collaboration with WITF a few years ago, which is really kind of tells this story of Abel and the evolution of the Pennsylvania Fish Commission.
Yes, I did put it into the chat. I think it's also important to recognize that Ralph Abel, prior to being at the Fish and Boat Commission, worked very closely with Senator Curry to pass the Environmental Rights Amendment because he was the executive director of what was then the Joint Legislative Conservation Committee. So he too is like a pivotal figure in our conservation legacy here in Pennsylvania.
And you probably knew this, Marci, but a fun fact: our joint friend Larry Schweiger, right, who later became the executive director of the Joint Legislative Committee, went on to many other things, including president of the National Wildlife Foundation, right? Ralph Abel was his Boy Scout master back in Pittsburgh when he was a kid. How about that, huh?
I love that. We're all interconnected.
That's right.
It's a good lesson in the interconnectedness of us.
That's right. So, okay. So for the last kind of segment, I wanted to bring things up to the present day and tackle a couple of, should I say, thorny issues, outstanding issues, things that we're still working really hard on today in Pennsylvania to figure out. And one of them is Chesapeake Bay, right? Back in the early 1980s, Pennsylvania under Governor Thornburgh really led the charge in bringing together the governors of the Bay states, the mayor or the leadership of the District of Columbia, and the Federal Environmental Protection Agency to establish a compact, right, to clean up the water jointly in the habitat of the Chesapeake Bay. The Susquehanna River is the largest freshwater supply for the Bay. And so even though Pennsylvania isn't kind of directly on the Bay, right, the actions of all of us as Pennsylvanians every single day have this enormous effect on the Bay itself. And it's become really tricky because the two major sources of pollution into the Bay, into the Susquehanna and then into the Bay, were and are municipal sewage, right? And agricultural runoff. And Pennsylvania has really struggled with that. Municipal sewage I can't say isn't an issue anymore, but it has largely been addressed. Billions and billions of dollars of federal money, of state money, of local money have gone into upgrading sewage treatment facilities that feed into the Susquehanna. But Pennsylvania agriculture, when you think of the thousands and thousands of small farms, of large farming operations, the runoff from those farms has proven to be a much more difficult public policy nut to crack. Pennsylvania in the mid 1990s set out to establish rules for nutrient runoff that were kind of hotly contested and hotly debated. Those were then sort of updated in the early 2000s. But Pennsylvania continues to kind of miss its goals for reducing overall nitrogen and nutrient runoff into the Bay. And this has become something that is a real challenge for us. And I know, Marci, that those kinds of issues are things that the Parks and Forest Foundation and other nonprofits and state agencies really struggle with today to kind of work to address.
I want to, when you're speaking about today and you're speaking about the Susquehanna and you started out with the shad, I'm putting a link from the Bay Journal into the chat box because recently there was a nature-like fish passage that was unveiled at Shikellamy State Park, which now allows eels and shad to reach their historic homes in the North Branch and the West Branch. So this was like the final step in that passageway. So it's interesting to me when you started talking about this conversation about the impact of dams started in the
Absolutely
1800s.
Yep.
And here in 2025, we finally made a passage around, an inflatable dam that was put in for recreation. So dams continue to be put in because if you think about all the dams along the Susquehanna River, they happened after, 1866. For energy production, for recreation, but they do come with some costs.
That's right. Yes, absolutely. As does flood protection, right? I mean, when you put concrete channels in for flood protection, that's land. Those are places that fish will not be spawning in. I would imagine. Of course, these issues, our job is to raise them, to bring them up, to advocate. We don't have solutions to all of them, right? But that notion of kind of bringing things full circle back to these to this agenda set out 150, almost 200 years ago in Pennsylvania, I think is a fascinating one. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, and I think it comes back to too, of our individual roles. I'm sitting at home, and for the past 3 days, trees have been being cut on a block over from me. Healthy, mature trees. And, we talk about stormwater impacts. We have communities that are having flash floods, stormwater issues, nothing keeping the rain from coming down, so you have suburban runoff, which, contributes to water quality. Could, depending on where you are, combined sewage overflow. So then you're talking about your sewage going into the water. So our individual actions are just as important as public policy.
Well, and of course, public policy emerges out of those individual actions, doesn't it? Right? As a whole. Yeah. Okay. Well, then let me to finish things off with a topic that is of very of signal importance. And if we're thinking back to sort of where I started talking about drinking water, just in 2023, the Pennsylvania legislature, upon recommendation from the Pennsylvania the Environmental Quality Board, has set standards for drinking water contaminated by these what they call forever chemicals, right? These kind of ubiquitous chemicals that have made life better, have improved the quality of life in so many different ways for us. But because of their ubiquity throughout water systems, have these long-term unintended and to an extent still unknown consequences. I think that sort of gets us to exactly the place where you started, where we have this sort of long-term vision of cleaning up streams, of maintaining clean drinking water, that even as we kind of sort of make progress, we see new challenges that emerge that require new types of public policies to address.
And I am putting a link into the chat box for DEP's website on PFAS in Pennsylvania, these forever chemicals.
So as so often happens, Marci, we start out with what we think is going to be 5 minutes and then talk, and 25 minutes later, here we are. So if folks have questions in the chat, we can, I'm happy to answer them to the best of my ability. And I look forward to continuing this conversation with you and with all our viewers as time goes on.
So Alan, I'll ask a question. There's none in the chat, and maybe somebody will take a moment to put something in. And that is, we just talked about policy. We talked about individual roles. Over the course of history, we can't take a deep dive, but, people have been instrumental in some of these big movements. Can you just spend like a moment talking about, these basically they're movements in history that resulted in policies that were beneficial to the environment, that required some negotiation, that required conversation, and sometimes tough conversations, because any policy is going to benefit some and may have adverse impacts on others.
So absolutely true, right? And I think that if I may point that in a direction for today, right? I mean, I think one of the most sort of difficult conversations that we're engaging with now is in talking about public policy. What is the role of regulation, right, in environmental quality improvements, right? There is this I think notion that there was this notion as part of the environmental revolution that I think folks thought it might be simpler than it was, right? Like that if we have the proper regulations, then that will result in steady improvements to the environment, right? And I think that the new challenges, and I think the Chesapeake Bay is a great example of this. We have such complicated sources of pollution in everybody's everyday life, right? I mean, I have a little. You were talking about cutting down trees, Marci, and I have a little farm, and I had to clear pasture land because I wanted to have a little farm, and I cut down lots of trees for that, right? So those questions of I know, but that question of what's the proper role of individuals in a shared environment, in these shared working landscapes, right? How do we go about kind of allowing for individual initiative, allowing for people to live their lives, right? While also ensuring the maximum possible improvement to our shared environment. I think that these are issues that have and concerns that have bedeviled Pennsylvanians throughout. And I'll use Myra Lloyd Dock, our favorite Myra Lloyd Dock, as this example, right? I mean, Myra, she was instrumental in improving the water quality within Harrisburg. I mean, she helped launch a movement that installed public sewers, installed public water, municipal water. Cleaned up the banks of the Susquehanna River. And this was a woman who was not politically powerful, didn't really start her activism until later in her life, and yet achieved so much through that bringing together of people with diverse backgrounds, as you said, and using her connections, her friends, people that she knew, kind of drawing them into those networks. And so I think, to bring things back to your question, looking at the ways in which people identify a problem and then use the relationships that they've developed over their lives with people to find solutions to that problem is something that every single one of us can do. Yeah,
yep. I think that's a great note to end on, because we are all empowered to make a change. And knowing your history is part of that empowerment.
Absolutely.
There's some really good lessons in the Cradle of Conservation and in the stories that are told on the PA Conservation Heritage Project and in the documentaries of people coming together, identifying an issue, and finding a solution. So, Alan,
I agree.
Thank you. These conversations go so fast.
Hey, what are we doing? Do we know what we're doing for next month yet?
Oh, I looked it up the other day. I don't remember.
Well, then I have a task for you. Once we get this posted, let folks know what we're going to do next month too, so we can. I
will. Just chat for 1 second. I might be able to bring it up. Let's see.
I'll wait. I mean, you don't want me to sing. I promise you that. But I can hum. I'll hum. I don't want to hum the Jeopardy theme though, because that'll probably just.
And my life's in jeopardy. Monthly programs. So in August, August was supposed to be water quality. We did it in July.
Yeah, that's all right. There's so much to talk about for water. So
July was it is plastics free July, so it was going to be policy. So I think we kind of combined the two.
That's right.
But so it'll be
we'll talk more about water. I think we'll talk more about water.
We can talk more about water, but in honor of Plastics Free Pennsylvania, think about a way that you can limit yourself and use of reusable cups. Great opportunity.
That's right.
All you need to do is make one change that could have a big impact.
So true.
Well, we have a quote: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." Alyssa, I love that quote, and in fact, I have it hanging right here on my bulletin board by my desk because it is an inspiring quote.
Absolutely.
By Margaret Mead, a Pennsylvanian.
Margaret Mead, Pennsylvanian Margaret Mead. That's right.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Well,
all right. Thank you.
Everybody, we'll see you next month.
All righty. Bye-bye.